First of all, thanks to CSR Box team for hosting this panel, a very important topic. Also, we realize that this is the last session of the day, so we have a task cut out to keep the audience engaged. So thanks everyone for joining us. I won't go into introductions because we have limited time. It's about 40 odd minutes that we have. So maybe we can begin with the discussion. I'll just take a couple of minutes in context setting. I must confess I'm not an expert in this space, but what I've seen as an investor investing into multiple sectors, that the philanthropic capital and philanthropic effort has played a very, very important role in making a lot of startups in India ready for venture capital, especially the sectors in financial inclusion, in rural development, in healthcare, in agriculture. There are dozens of startups I work with. I think they were not ready for venture capital, but it was the philanthropic capital which made them reach the stage where a lot of good investors can look at them. The second point I want to make, I also been hearing from multiple sources that India is moving towards Viksit Bharat, developed country by 2047, and do we need philanthropy? And it's a very obvious question, but my answer to that is always that if we want a growth to be inclusive, I think philanthropy has a huge role to play. We don't want our top 400 million consumers to grow at 10, 15%, and the bottom, whatever, 400 million, 500 million to grow at 3%, right? And I think that's where I see the role of philanthropy in sort of targeting those white spaces, underserved spaces, which can bring equality in the way we grow in next 20, 30 years. And the last point I want to make, we were just discussing before this panel, is what really excites me the most is the kind of talent that I see in the whole philanthropic space. I remember 2 decades back, people were very reluctant to join this space. There was always some sort of stigma with not-for-profit, CSR, etc. But thankfully, last 5, 7 years, the kind of talent that we see in CSR, in philanthropy, in social entrepreneurship, I think it is probably the best at par with any other sector. So I think that gives me a lot of optimism that we are in the right space and the future is bright for this space. So I'll pause here, given the paucity of time. Maybe we can start with question and answers. Probably I can pull Charu into the discussion. Charu, there's a lot of confusion. There is philanthropy, there is social entrepreneurship, there is also CSR. Can you help us demystify? Can you help us construct the Venn diagrams? What is the overlap? And what are the differences in terms of the purpose and the intent?
Hello. Hi, everyone. So yes, there are overlaps, but what really matters is the intent, the attitude, as well as the values that each come with. So philanthropy, let's say, is the daddy of all socially motivated, socially inspired programs from the time of, ever since corporates were set up, from the times of J.R.D. Tata, etc. And probably what would differentiate would be, regulation in terms of defining what is CSR, because that would determine the direction and the nuance of how programs are designed, monitored, tracked, reported, as well as what is philanthropy. So just, I'm sure everybody knows that, but in terms of setting a context, because we sometimes also tend to use it very seamlessly, CSR, philanthropy together. So CSR, yes, it's 2013 Company Act, which actually defined the thresholds in terms of who would be, responsible, who would become eligible or qualified to actually take some money out of their profits and do some social programs which are socially responsible. So they have a public commitment. I mean, it has to be even declared. Philanthropy is voluntary, philanthropy is donation, grant in that sense. CSR wouldn't want to call it donation because it is inspired by the thing of, the triple bottom line, people, profit, planet. And there is a reporting framework. as well as the whole sustainability aspect around it. They need to be sustainable. So let me just come to social entrepreneurship. Okay, in the previous section, I think one of our speakers also mentioned you need data points as to excite the corporate which programs they want to take. So if CSR wants to fund programs of any NGO or of any social good, they would rely on certain data points, they would rely on certain impact potential. So I think that, again, would, although nothing that prevents philanthropy from, going the same way. It would just provide the direction, but also it would blur the point of sustainability. Social entrepreneurs, in that sense, I would say, it's all both, somebody has to, it has to fund for itself in a sense. They go for programs, viable solutions, which have to have innovation at its heart. I think just before we left off the last project, the last discussion, the closing point was on innovation. But I feel personally, innovation has to also focus on sustainability. And that's where social entrepreneurs today are working. As you mentioned rightly, the whole charge of making it inclusion, mainstreaming those who are left out or who are marginalized. Social entrepreneurs do that very well because then they identify what is a social problem, bring entrepreneurial skill sets to it, and solve for it in a sense which becomes viable for themselves as well as for the beneficiaries for whom they also try and create those. So whether it's job creation, inclusion, whether it is solutions for education, health, safety, agripreneurs you have today. They are also a special kind of social entrepreneurs and several other strands. I don't want to take up too much of the time, but I think last point what I would say is that semantics aside, it shouldn't just become an act of giving. It's not an act of giving. Philanthropy, CSR, social entrepreneurship should not, and that's I think would be my one submission in this panel and in this room, because when you give, you actually position the taker. That should not be, although it is in effect giving, but let that not take over the entire story or the narrative of, creating an impact and building communities.
Great, Charu. I think that's a very important statement. It's more than act of giving, which all of us should realize. I think that takes me to another point, which probably, Meera, you can take up. When we look at all of these philanthropic programs, there's important role of partnerships. I guess most philanthropic organizations work with certain partners. So just, can you double click on it and, how does partnerships amplify the impact of philanthropy?
So, can you hear me? So, one of the critical problems, if you look at any sector, the problems in India is something that one person cannot or one entity cannot handle by itself. So, for example, if you take education, and like our organization, which is very focused on higher education, that itself, there are so many flavors, So our program is looking at providing scholarships, financial aid, training, and mentoring to over 10,000 children currently in the program for their higher education. But can one organization do it completely? No. So we have to look at it to create impact, we need to partner with corporates, we need to partner with government, we need to partner with other grassroots NGOs, we need to partner with individuals who are in the giving space, so that the overall impact can be amplified or multiplied. Okay, and one key aspect to bring all of them together is technology. And if you really ask, one of the biggest enabler for working together has been technology. And technology has always been the biggest disruptor of businesses. But if you really think back and ask which has been the disruptor of technology in the past few years, the answer is really COVID. in India, COVID has really played the role of in making sure that technology has been adopted by the billions, not the top level of privileged people who are working in IT or whatever. So just to give an example, technology has enabled, from 3 different perspectives. You have the beneficiary, you have the giver or the corporates, and you have the implementation agency or the partners, who are on the ground working to make sure that it happens. So for all of them, technology has been very important from different points of view. So for an implementation agency like us, when we are scaling this program called Vidyadhan, this year we got 1 lakh applications. How are you going to process them without technology? So during COVID time, we could not go out and interview students and conduct the tests and everything. It made us think differently. Now we are conducting everything online, and the student from rural India can take the test from their home on a mobile. And we have video proctoring and everything in place. And COVID became an enabler because the mental block that parents and teachers had on using, giving mobile space to children, it just vanished. It became an enabler. And it also, if you look at from a corporate's perspective, using a platform like in our case Vidyadhan, it brings in transparency, which is very important when it comes to creating partnerships, when it in making sure that it is visible to everybody, how the entire performance of the students or whatever it happens. And then at the end of the day, beneficiary, for a student, how does it benefit, who is at the center in this case in education. So AI and all this new technology that is coming up, it is going to play a key role in making the learning very immersive. And the beauty of it is that it will be available to a person sitting in Ladakh or person sitting in rural Bihar, as much as somebody who is studying in a CBSE school or international school in Bangalore. So that is the power of technology in making sure that it is equitable, the education is equitable. And, I would just say that for partnerships to work, there has to be trust. So there has to be a trust between the corporates and the implementation agencies and the final beneficiary. If that trust quotient is not there, and different people will have to make sure, you can have metrics, and I heard the same thing in the previous panel. End of the day, you have to keep the beneficiary at the center and make sure that, what do they really want? Why do we exist? We should not forget that question, and the trust factor should trump any metrics, any reporting, any time of the day. Thank you.
Thanks, Meera. I think glad you highlighted the role of technology. It took us a pandemic to realize what technology can do, but nonetheless, there's something positive which came out of the pandemic. And thankfully, there are a lot of tech entrepreneurs in the sector which hopefully will improve adoption of technology to drive the impact. I think then probably I'll go to Shafalika. Shafalika, I think there's a lot of discussion around what is a good program design for any philanthropy in terms of the timelines, durations, use of capital. Because, in a country like India, it takes time to create impact, So can you share your experiences? Can you suggest what is a good program design in your opinion?
So at the core of every program design is, of course, the need of the beneficiary, which we all know very well about, and it's, the need-based assessment is absolutely imperative. But going beyond that, I think what's very important today is that every program must have a sustainable outlook. And if the program has to have a sustainable outlook, it must also come with an exit policy, right? And that exit policy must take into consideration various parameters that there will be the need for adaptability in a program based on geographical locations, the ability of the beneficiaries, and it'll change. So just to give you a small example, we were working on, livelihood skills and through an SHG model in a particular district in Orissa and Angul. The literacy level over there is higher. And we managed to finish this program in the stipulated period of 3 years. But when we took this to the Keonjhar district, because of the capacity of the beneficiaries being lower, that program did not materialize in 3 years. And therefore, one needs the flexibility, which also goes back to the point you made about the trust-based philanthropy. Because it cannot only be that here's your timeline, here's how you operate. Then we go to the duration factor, which of course impacts the flexibility, but it's also that today philanthropy has realized you really want to bring about systemic change, it's going to have to be long-term interventions. You can't, sort of dabble in something, be very, restrictive about it, because if you really want to see that sustainable outlook, which was your goal, it has to be a long-term intervention. And the last part is about the impact measurement of a program. We all, of course, have to be wired in a certain manner to bring quantitative results, but qualitative results are the key if you really want to bring about intergenerational change. So all these factors have to be taken into account when you design a program.
That's great, and totally agree. Ultimately, it's about creating sustainable impacts. It's not about sort of short-term measures and short-term goals, and for that you need, and the need for flexibility, I think that is another very important point that you mentioned. With that, probably I'll go to Gayatri. I think India is a large country, and there's no dearth of problems, there's no dearth of sectors where philanthropy can play an important role. Can you give us some idea how philanthropy should target? What are the sectors to approach, how to approach? Is there a hierarchy of sorts we should be looking at?
So I don't think there are specific sectors that only philanthropy can do and CSR can't. But I think how philanthropy gives can be different. So whatever sector you take, philanthropy can be patient. Where, like Shafalika said, we're not looking at 3-year outcomes. We can take a long view. Philanthropy can take risks, which again, government and CSR can't do. And I think, and philanthropy can pivot even in between. When they hear from the community that this is not working for us, it can change. Or hear your NGOs. I think that flexibility is something that philanthropy should embrace and should be doing more of, and funding areas that CSR, etc. can't. So, for example, the work we do in capacity building. Typically, a lot of CSRs have restrictions on how much of their funds can be used on internal organizational development. We as a foundation say all of our money can be spent on that. Build your HR practices, build your fundraising strength. We work with partners who can provide that support to NGOs so that they can build those muscles for the long-term sustainability we talked about. And I think as we think about, if there are future philanthropists in this room, I think as you think about designing your program, I think it's very important to take the points Shafalika talked about, have that long-term view, have that impact focus, and work very closely with the communities and partners.
Great, no, that's good to hear. Thanks very much. Arnav, maybe, sorry for keep you waiting, but everyone wants to hear from you because I believe Gates Foundation is one of the most active philanthropic organization in the country, and probably for Gates Foundation also India is probably one of the largest market, if I can say so. So can you share your experience in India, and what really makes you bullish about Indian market in terms of the change that you can bring in the country?
First, thanks Hemendra, and thanks to CSR Box for hosting such a fantastic event, and thanks to everyone for staying back. It's the last session for the day, so really appreciate that. I think just to correct, I mean India is definitely the largest market, but a lot of other people on the panel and everyone is doing fantastic work, and we partner with almost everyone on the panel in many of the initiatives. So partnerships is very, very critical. I think few points I'll make, which is which makes us bullish and our founders bullish. One, I think impact at scale. India as a market compared to relatively other markets has shown that you can make impact happen at scale. And I'll speak about a few examples. So, we've cut our maternal mortality rate by half in the last 7-8 years. We've cut our under 5 mortality rate by half in the last 7-8 years. Women bank accounts have tripled in the last 7-8 years. 78% people have digital bank accounts now in the country. Wash, sanitation, I mean, the less, everyone in the room knows about it, how probably the only country, I would say, in the last few years which has prioritized sanitation at such a scale and, got so many people to come along inside that. We've eliminated polio, we eliminated, very close to eliminating another disease, visceral leishmaniasis. So I think there's a lot in terms of, progress that we are seeing across many sectors, and at scale, 1.4 billion people, roughly 20% of the world's population. But also at the same time, digitalization has been a big, big enabler. We spoke about technology before. I think the progress from a DPI perspective that India has shown, and DPI is an enabler which democratizes impact at scale in many ways. And India is exporting that to many countries now. So even if you take example of, I'm sure many people, since it's near the airport, would have used DigiYatra to come in today, or would use it to go out. I mean, it's changed my life for sure. Cut off 20 minutes every morning or evening. Very few countries have that going. LocOS, which I don't know if anyone knows about, is a platform for self-help group women. So every self-help group is now registered on a mobile app, and you can use that to send transactions. The government is sending their grants money directly through LocOS, and hopefully very soon the banks will also start using that to share transactions or send transactions through the LocOS system. There is Diksha system on the education side. 200 million students access it. 7 million teachers are part of it. Just makes you feel like there is an equality which is coming in through some of the philanthropy and open systems. And last, I'll say, I think it's been a large people's movement in the country. Whether you take any of the Jan Andolans, the PM gave a clarion call for sanitation, I think for tuberculosis, for many of the other diseases or even financial services, we are seeing people join hands and come together. So that makes us really bullish because of impact at scale, digitalization, and I think people's movement, which makes it all happen from a long-term sustainability perspective.
Great, phenomenal amount of work across sectors, as you mentioned, and thanks for highlighting the role of DPGs. I think I always call India as a capital of DPGs in the world, the kind of DPGs that we have produced. I think there's everyone for every person on this planet to see. In fact, there's a lot of discussion around taking the UPI framework to multiple countries. And if you look at the world's top DPGs, I think India's some 15 plus DPGs which are already operational, and another 15 works. And it has become a benchmark for other countries to follow. So that's really great news. And of course, we've seen the impact in terms of UPI in COVID. We saw CoWIN and so many other account aggregator to make lending sort of accessible to all the Indians. So this is great. I'll go back to Charu. Charu, you talked about social entrepreneurship. Of course, there are many of them on the ground, and they typically start with some grant or some catalyzing capital or from some money coming from the government. How do you see social capital or philanthropic capital helping entrepreneurs to attract mainstream capital? Because that's what makes the impact sustainable and long term.
In fact, what the list that Arnav just kind of rattled, took us through, that's all social capital, entirely, right? And it has actually given rise to so many people getting into all the areas. Meera, Shafalika, Gayatri, all of, mentioned certain examples. And all of these have inspired lots of NGOs, startups, social entrepreneurs to come in and be part of it. And so many of those innovations are now getting mainstreamed. So I won't go into the examples, Arnav, you took. But first of all, what is social capital? It has to be mobilized for the people it is meant for. That means it has to have relevance, it has to be used by them, it has to be paid by them, paid for by people, by the user. So in that sense, there has to be viability around it. Therefore, the kind of examples you took, Arnav, they create multiplier effect. So whether it is social, whether it is economic, whether it is environmental, at the heart of or mainstreaming any of these, and taking it, making it a little more broad-based. For example, ease of living. So whichever, whether it's a startup or a social entrepreneur, any business, small enterprise, big enterprise, which is actually investing money in social good, ease of living, education, health, nutrition, the session before that we took, environmentally, we're talking about green debt today, we're talking about water conservation, energy conservation. I mean, so what are those kind of programs that enable? In terms of economic, of course, return on investment is there, but innovative products are actually will actually propel sustainability and, attract for more investment. So I would say, I think, if I were to name certain programs, and we have the whole Pullman, I mean, outside you have so many of the NGOs and those who have, the kiosks outside. So it's education, employability challenge that we need to solve for, right? I would say assistive technologies, which apart from bridging the digital divide, bring about social good. So in terms of disability, for the vision impaired, assistive technologies have helped a long way. Rural, social e-commerce platforms, which enable, I would say, affordable goods at reasonable prices to reach goods to the doorstep delivery. How many of your, I mean, today, of course, there's Amazon, Flipkart, etc., and several others. But how many village homes are actually getting doorstep delivery to their homes? There are several examples. So while a lot of this happens, you mentioned education, the edtech happening. But while all this happens, there's a very complex societal change happening at the heart of it. There is, gender just transitioning happening at the heart of it. And all of it is they're going to give rise to even more elegant, models of sustainability. Even, we're talking about nutrition, agriculture, precision farming for marginalized farmers, saving water, soil-less farming, zero waste product, connect to the market. All of it is happening, which needs investment, which needs capital, social capital. But it has a large potential in terms of making it mainstream and, bringing out that social good. Affordable housing, mobility. So there are lots of areas where which will actually enable the mainstreaming of all these, and we've seen lots of examples. I won't go into that.
Yeah, no, you're totally right. I invest in agri-tech sector, and I've seen, at least for first 10 years, it was largely impact capital which supported the sector. There were no VCs, no mainstream VC. Everyone used to think extremely risky, extremely policy-driven. But for last 7 years, we've seen so many investors joining the sort of the club in terms of investing into the sector, which was perceived to be very difficult and risky. And you talked about rural e-commerce. I can tell you, since a lot of my work is in villages, 70–80% of the farmers have smartphones. And they're very comfortable placing an order online.
Business on WhatsApp.
Yeah, WhatsApp, YouTube, a lot of apps that they download. So it's quite fascinating to see how technology is reaching the remotest parts of the country. So I think continuing with theme of technology, Meera, going back to you, I think education is another area, and you do a lot of work in this, and especially, again, in pandemic, this whole digital means of education picked up quite a bit, right? Do you see this technologies playing a role, especially, we were talking about Odisha, tribal communities in Odisha, these kind of places where probably these students don't have access to the best of the coaching centers or schools or colleges. Can technology bridge this gap of sort of making it more inclusive for them?
Okay. For technology to bridge this gap, there has to be an infrastructure. Just like physical infrastructure, the technology infrastructure has to be in place. In terms of connectivity and all that, I would say that it has improved considerably. But still there are tribal areas, like you mentioned, where the penetration or availability of digital infrastructure is low. But I think various state governments are working on it, making digital infrastructure like, responsibility of providing free of cost or at marginal cost to the users. That is something that most governments are working on. Once that happens, technology will be available to everybody. And I can actually see the difference over the past few years, on the ground. I interview thousands of children every year for our program. And every year, I am surprised by how much they are advanced in their thinking. Just to give an example, one girl from Bihar, from rural Bihar, and I asked what her aspiration is. She wants to be an astronaut. And, and very clear thought process behind it. I never expected to hear that from somebody who is like 15 or 16 in that, how to go about it and all that. And what surprised me even more is that, what is your hobby? She said, learning Korean language. And I was like, Korean language, So it is not just the urban kids who have access to ATS and influenced by ATS and K-drama or whatever, but YouTube has been a big, big enabler for the youth across the board. I have seen kids, 15, 16-year-old, who are running YouTube, and monetizing that and earning 15,000 rupees a month to 50,000 rupees a month, which is more than what their parents are getting. Okay, so it has been, really it has the power to make such a transformation, and it has in democratizing, and making education equitable. And you talked about the entrance test and coaching and stuff like that. So 10 years back, we offered, along with scholarships, access to, online coaching, this is pre-COVID. And, at that time, it was so expensive. And the rural children did not have access to physical coaching centers. So we thought, okay, we will try this. We worked with some of the startups then and offered. So we had to provide the tab. We had to make sure that, everything was very expensive. But now nobody needs that, because somebody like Physics Wala, the cost of that coach, it is available, basic one, is available for 4,000 to 5,000 rupees. So it is really making a huge impact, and I would call it a social enterprise, like what you said. I just wanted to add on to the social, on raising capital, this concept of social exchange has come up, where, in the stock market, you can trade it. I think some of the NGOs for profit, as well as not for profit, where in not for profit, you can invest it back into the thing. So you can raise the capital through that as well. I just wanted to do that as well.
Right. No, thanks, Meera. Shafalika, coming back to you, role of philanthropy, especially in capacity building. How do you see that happening?
So there are two aspects to capacity building. Up till now, we've been talking about the aspect of capacity building for the beneficiary at the ground level. But I think the more important piece about philanthropy and capacity building is actually building the capacity or enhancing the capacity of the NGOs and the CBOs and the development agencies, right? So we talked about digital. Now we have so many of our NGOs and CBOs at the ground level, and they have not yet adapted to being able to leverage digital. So we need to enhance that capacity. That comes at a cost. So that is where I believe that philanthropy can really play a role. And also taking back to Gayatri's point, where, we cannot cap administrative costs at a certain level, because when you want to enhance your capacity, it's going to come with time and capital. And it's only once you will get your operational expertise enhanced, will you be able to have the impact of a better impact, larger impact on the ground, and you will also be able to scale up. So that, I think, is something philanthropists certainly understand and are willing to invest in, but we do need the regulators to understand.
Right. Well, thanks very much. Since we have only 5 minutes, my last question to maybe Gayatri and Arnav, you may also answer this. So there are many philanthropies all trying to do good. Everyone has their own goals, setting, etc. Is there a way we can converge all this effort, sort of to make the impact larger, bigger? Are there any platforms for convergence? I don't know, CSR Box could be one such platform which I can think of, but are there any platforms where we need to converge our efforts and hopefully do better and do something together?
You want to take that? I think philanthropists and philanthropies and CSRs, we do collaborate more organically, not like you said through platforms. I think that's something that's needed in the sector. But I think it shouldn't just be about the philanthropies or CSRs or donor organizations collaborating. I think the collaboration needs to be much beyond that. It needs to keep the communities at the center and then everyone required to make that social change, whether it's government, NGOs, CSRs, philanthropies, HNIs, everyone coming together towards that one outcome. Easier said than done, but we've started making an attempt to doing that in the work that we do on water, which initially we were doing completely as philanthropists, then got community involved. Now community actually bears 70% of the cost of that work. Government has now come in, so our role as philanthropists has gone down to 2% of the total cost. But what our role then is managing the whole thing. So that's not a cost that I can put to it, but our role then becomes bringing together and making sure that that impact is actually happening.
If I can just interject really quickly, I think that point on, convergence and partnerships is also a method for capacity building. Because when you partner with people, when you converge the ideas, is when you are actually leveraging the best case practices, you are sharing knowledge, and you're also minimizing any duplication of work that we have been doing when we operate in silos.
Great. Arnav?
Yeah, I'll just maybe highlight a proverb which even Mr. Tata, used to love and live for. So, if we go alone, we go fast. But if we go together, we go far. And I think there are multiple examples of that which are happening. But of course, there could be more and many more need to happen to have that impact at scale, which I was mentioning before. I think some of us in the panel were discussing before how can we further collaborate on few of the initiatives. I was talking to Bhaumik ji just before the panel, and they were talking about working with one of the governments in the Northeast to get many corporates to come together. I think there are examples across sectors. For us, we are looking at 4 big areas for our work in the next decade. One is innovation ecosystem, and there are a lot of work on AI. Second is about taking our learnings from here to Africa. So the DPG one is more made in India, made for the world in some ways. 3 is about diffusion of the learnings in the country and work in multiple states. And 4th is about partnerships. So on that, for every area in which we are operating, we have a few partnerships with large philanthropies and also other foundations and many non-profits also. I'll maybe just give 2 examples and close out. One on the Tribal Health Collaborative, we are working with the Ministry of Tribal Affairs, Ministry of WCD, Ministry of Health, Piramal Foundation, USAID, to solve for health and nutrition challenges, also tuberculosis. Second, on the end ultra poverty. So if one would have seen the headlines, I think yesterday or today, Indian poverty is roughly at about 129 million people are living in extreme poverty, which is $2.15 per day. And we've got about 100 million people per decade, from 431 million people in 1990 to about 129 million people now. And End Ultra Poverty, which is one initiative that the Nudge Foundation, along with BRAC and many other organizations, both on non-profit side and on the philanthropy side, are working on with the Ministry of Rural Development. How can we get certain initiatives also on those going? On education, large part of our work is with Central Square Foundation in India. And we're replicating some of those ideas across different markets. So I think partnerships is a core pillar across multiple stakeholders. The more we can, the better it is, I think, for the long term for the sector.
Oh, these are great examples. I think clearly power of coming together. It makes 2 + 2 = 5, which we all understand. I think we are out of time, but I want to be respectful to audience. If there are a couple of questions, maybe we can take. Can someone take the mic? A couple of questions out there. One at the back, one in the front.
Gayatri, water is something which touches everything. And, you know, what you mentioned about getting a collaborative together, if you could just expand a bit more about it, you know, be it the government, be it the ecosystem of philanthropy or the CSR, because just the metric of water, you know, if you speak to be it philanthropy, CSR, government, there isn't a common metric as of now, right? I did a session where Amrita from your team was there, and that's something we discussed. So just give us a vision of this collaborative that you've mentioned, where you said a lot of things are coming together. Just elaborate a bit on that.
Sure, happy to. First of all, thank you everyone for staying past 7 p.m. I will answer this, but we can also talk offline, so it doesn't bore everyone else. But essentially what we do is a very specific program around rejuvenating water bodies. While we were doing it ourselves, we could do 20, 30, 40 a year in Maharashtra, in the drought-prone areas of Marathwada, Vidarbha. The cost of rejuvenating a water body of about 1 hectare is 11.5 lakhs. But when community participates in it, and their participation is to take that silt and put it on through their farms, the cost comes down by about 70%. That 70% is, so about 3 lakhs per water body is what then it costs to just dig out the silt. That now government is paying. So now Maharashtra has now got a permanent scheme around rejuvenating water bodies. Niti Aayog has done that. You know, we're also speaking to other states where they can follow the same model. 15 Finance Commission funds can be used. So there is money within government. What we are doing is helping them actually make that happen. So we've built out an app which helps triangulate data to make sure the work has actually happened to the extent that it has. We've created learning modules, which is now on the government IGOT platform, so any civil servant can pick it up and learn how to do it. In terms of metric, what we look at in terms of impact is the land use, land cover, which we can see through satellite images. We look at well data and look at, government itself is collecting that data, so we look at the changes in the groundwater levels. And we look at, for our own selves, what the income of farmers has been because they've put that silt on their fields. That's more self-reported data. The rest is easily verifiable.
Right. There was one question at the back. I think there are many. Bhaumik, can we take a few?
Okay. Yeah, okay. This question is to Meeraji. Actually, I heard you and I really resonate with the ideas and what you said, which is why I wanted to, ask you. As a young entrepreneur, and working in education, I really feel, India is at a stage that maybe in one generation we can, educate a very large population of a country, given the digital infrastructure and the quality education that we have. However, as an entrepreneur, when I go to take up such projects of such scale, need so much resources, if I take it up as a business, what happens is the people who need education don't have the money to pay for it. So there is no sustainable business model. If I reach the government, businesses are looked upon as greedy, private profit-seeking, enterprises. So you may not qualify, but a development sector organization may qualify better. If you work for CSR projects, they have a lot of constraints which don't allow such long-term risky projects, which doesn't have precedents. And such projects only develop if they've been tried, piloted, with a focused, attempt. So I'm just coincidentally here, but what I heard about philanthropy, I see some hope that these are people who could probably, encourage and bring forth such ideas. So I want an advice as a young entrepreneur. How do you think, if I have such ideas which are transformative, which can be considered stupid or mad, how do I reach out to such organizations, or how do I take these ideas forward? Because I see I can do it, but I know I can't do it alone, and I don't know how to go about it.
I wish I had an answer. Tell me forget about philanthropy. Tell me any startup that does not undergo this, have these constraints, and which will not have the risk. It is going to be there. But I get your point. So if you decide, if the idea is good, now there are people who are ready to invest. I talked about the social impact exchange, social stock exchange. Some of them have started that, so you can trade it. There are people who are willing to invest on that. And then the other part is, our own organization has a program called EduMendum, which is about mentoring people who are getting into the education space with great ideas, and help them get the, making sure that they can raise the funds on their own if they prefer to be non-profit or CSR funding or whatever. So there are different models in which we can work on that.
There are many questions coming. Maybe it's okay for us to stay. It's okay. Yeah, please.
Hi everyone. I'm Momita. I'm from Vidobird. So just wanted to ask, like, I think one fact has already been established that capacity building is definitely important for NGOs to grow sustainably, right? So what are some of the most effective ways you've seen capacity building getting integrated into like philanthropy? And what is maybe the best possible way to scale this approach as well? I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. Thanks.
Well, clearly it has to be organic growth. Some of the most efficient ways is that I think larger organizations should really adopt the smaller organizations on the ground and try to enhance their capacity. But there's also going to be a more structured platform where, the smaller organizations can get into the loop and, various catalysts can find that method of connecting them to the philanthropists, and therefore they can grow.
I think my question is to Arno, basically. So, we spoke about the social capital and the funds and everything. So, we all are corporate, but when it comes to CSR, we forget the corporate head and we suddenly jumps into the NGO sector. So, if you see that most of the banks, they have consolidated in last 5 years. All big banks, SBI, whatever. But there are a lot of CBS banks are coming up. Bandhan Bank or CBS banks and other banks. So there is a lot of capital which is flowing into the small banks or NBFCs. And we're still talking about the capital. So now big banks are running out of the deposits while the share market is seeing a lot of investment into this, right? So there is a clear disconnect because all the transactions, UPI, we are doing almost $1 trillion of, investment. So the money is flowing, but we are unable to tap it. And this is the capital which is coming from the chai wala to the sabji wala. And still we work for them कि वो खेतों में सब्जी उगाएगा तो पैसे वाला हो जाएगा. He is already there. The problem is we are unable to tap that market and unable to scale up it. So I think, how we can go about that. So money is not problem. You say government, money not problem. For the philanthropy, money is not problem. For the poor people, money is not problem. It's channelizing, it's the problem. So, how we can take that capital out for the benefit of the NGOs or the startups. They are running out of money.
It's a good question. I think, I agree with you when there is ambition and there is resource. Ambition overtakes, is greater than resource. I think it's bringing all of these together and orchestration, which can be possible in a few different ways. I think Gayatri spoke about how they've worked with the government and the Ministry of Water to build certain models and get people to engage on that or create playbooks. I think Neeti has set up a few platforms where they tried to bring in both capital, entrepreneurs through the Women Entrepreneurship Platform. There is the Ag Infrastructure Fund, which the government set up and trying to get NBFCs and private banks to come in. I think through all of that, what needs to happen is, and which is happening is my understanding and will continue to happen, is that we have now the digital infrastructure, going back to your social capital point, everyone has a unique ID. I think how do we start using that to making sure the flow happens? And to that, I think the philanthropies can play some role. The private sector definitely needs to unleash that and take it to the last mile. Many of things are happening. I would say NBFCs or even startups or fintechs have all the stock market boom we spoke about is because of the entire Aadhaar KYC boom which happened, and anyone can open now a demat account in 1 minute. I think so the capital is flowing. I wouldn't agree that the capital is not flowing. I think more of that needs to flow, definitely, and I think all of us can play a certain role alongside with any of the organizations in the room to make that happen.
And their NPAs are very low, 0.5% against the bigger bank, which are into thousands of scores.
No, actually,
So
if you look at the self-help groups, you're absolutely right. I spoke about low COS. So if you look at the self-help groups, the reason why they've been successful in India, we have now 100 million of those, is primarily because of the low NPA that the SHGs have been able to have. And I think given now that fintech boom is going to the rural last mile, there are models which are coming up which are enabling that to happen. I think there is still an unfinished business, and there is still lots of room and lots of, which needs to happen on that. I'm sure that people in the room who were talking about the innovations will make it happen alongside all of us.
I just want to share one example, since you talked about flow of capital, and I think Arnav referred to Agri Infra Fund, which government has created. The startup I work with in Aurangabad called As Technologies, they made dehydrators. It cost about 100,000 rupees, and no one was buying them. They tried some banks, they refused, some cooperative bank agreed, but at 15% interest rate. There were like 100 entrepreneurs who came forward. The day it got classified under AIF, the government scheme, the interest rate came down to 5.9%. And that number has shot up from 100 to 3,000 micro entrepreneurs. All women. And the impact you see, all of them are earning 10,000 rupees sitting at home. It's a very simple machine where the startup gives them some raw material, they will dehydrate and they buy it back. This is the kind of impact, these kind of schemes and sort of convergence of. Yeah.
It's basically we are lacking some institutional where these funds can be tapped.
Yeah. Okay, I think thanks very much. I know there are probably a few more questions, but you can take it offline. Thanks to all the panelists. Some really, really good conversations, very open and candid conversations. I wish if we had more time. But thanks to all the panelists and thanks to all the audience for patient listening. Sitting beyond 7 p.m. I know all of you probably want to go home or have dinner. So thanks very much for listening to us.